Okay, let's see. Sorry, I'm being a bit distracted by all this stuff about Lurgan, my beard, and other things. You guys are just too bad. Anyway, good day, everybody. Hello, it's great to be back here at MEC. It's great to be back at an event that brings together the brightest and best, and maybe some of the inadequate, like myself, of the Exchange community. Today, we're going to talk about a tenant's guide to the Microsoft 365 Substrate, which is a topic I know little about. So you're going to find nothing whatsoever about it. It should be all good. My name is Tony Redmond. I've been around Exchange for quite a long time. In fact, the first MEC speaker slot I had was in 1997, which is at the first MEC in San Diego. It was a fantastic event. I also attended the 1996 Microsoft Exchange Deployment Conference in Austin, Texas, which is also a nice event too. And it's great to be back here so many years later, even though I'd much prefer if I could see you all in person, because you know what? Talking to a screen is great, but being able to insult people face to face is even better, and that's what I like doing. Anyway, I've been an MVP for Exchange and other disciplines since 2024 or 2004. Microsoft didn't want me to be an MVP for some reason for a long time. But anyway, that's all water under the bridge. And right now, I have several roles that I work at. I'm the lead author of the Office 365 for IT Pros ebook, which is a book that we publish monthly to reflect the amount of change that's in Office 365, Microsoft 365, and indeed in Exchange Online. So that keeps me very, very busy. And to fill in all the other hours, I am the editorial director of practical365.com, where we try and publish articles that have a very practical bent to try and help people understand the technology that's going on. Anyway, that's all boring stuff. But let me pause here a little bit and reflect. When I was asked to speak at MEC, I went through the same type of unique terror that all speakers at conferences like this go through, I think. You see, when you get down to it, there are two types of conference sessions rather. One is a session that tells you all about new technology or new features about an existing technology. And those type of sessions are usually done by engineers or developers who work on that technology. And that's great. That's what you come to a conference for to listen to that kind of thing. The other type of session is a session that reports back on a technology. It reports back on how to use the technology, deploy the technology, manage the technology. It's all the practical stuff about day-to-day life with the technology. But coming up with a good session that would be interesting for a conference like MEC, it really takes a little bit of thinking about. So what I thought was that I would take a view of a tenant administrator and say, well, what the hell is this thing called the Microsoft 365 Substrate? Because the Microsoft 365 Substrate, I think, is a thing that people have talked about. You can see some documentation, very little documentation, I would say, but it's out there on the net, and it's something that people may know a little bit about, but not a lot about. And I wanted to try and give you a perspective of what the substrate is from a tenant administrator's perspective, not a deep dive into what it is from a developer's perspective, not a deep dive into what it is from a pure technology perspective, but where are you going to meet the substrate on a day-to-day basis and how you might actually interact with it as you manage a tenant. And before we do that, I think what I'd like to do is I'd like to give you some context. That means a little bit of history, put it all together. And then I want to talk about how the substrate helps with this challenge, which is how to make some radically different workloads cooperate. You know, think Those of you that had the unique experience of trying to make Exchange 2013 and SharePoint 2013 come together to embrace around the concept of site mailboxes, and remember the 53 or 55 different steps that were documented that you had to do to make the two servers, those two on-premises servers come together. You'll appreciate this. So you have these radically different workloads out there in Office 365. Let's cooperate and make them. And then finally, we'll wrap up and say, what does that all mean for admins? So a little bit of Office 365 history, just to make sure we're all on the same phase, or page rather. Exchange at Edu was the first cloud service, dating from around 2004, a long time ago. Then we had BPOS. BPOS was, how could I say it? Not very good. I mean, BPOS was a great example of how you take a product that worked okay on premises and you force fit it to serve a cloud audience, and it didn't work so well. Anyway, we'll forget BPOS and move quickly along to say Office 365 came along, promised a whole new kind of way of working. July 2011, so it's been around for about 11 years now, and I think two things are of interest here. Firstly, that when Office 365 was delivered, it really was just a loose collection of the current generation of on-premise applications. So you had Exchange 2010, you had SharePoint 2010, you had Link 2010, all wrapped up with a little bit of administration, common administration, or vaguely common administration, like around account management and billing, which was of course important because you were now having to pay for a service every month. So that was one of the things that was interesting about me. The second thing that interests me about this is that the service level agreement that Microsoft announced at the time, they said, look, we're going to announce this financially backed service level agreement, SLA, for these cloud services. And if these cloud services don't meet an SLA of 99.9%, we'll pay you back money. We'll refund you some of your license fee. And at the time, it's only 11 years ago, but at the time, I think people scoffed at that. They said, there's no way this can happen. No way this can happen. These services are going to be down all the time. And indeed, up to around October 2011, there were a couple of pretty high profile disasters, mostly around DNS management. But since then, I think it's probably an understated fact that Microsoft 365, Office 365 has managed to deliver an SLA greater than 99.9% for all the months in between. I mean, it's just been a phenomenal success in terms of cloud services. And I think one of the reasons why it's been a big success is that there's been an enormous amount of engineering effort since July 2011, and indeed before July 2011, to integrate the workloads, to integrate Exchange, integrate SharePoint, integrate Skype, and now Teams, to create what I call a software toolkit. And that software toolkit is what drives innovation, drives new apps. I mean, Teams is the greatest example of a new app that comes from the software toolkit. There's lots of services that Teams consumes from Exchange, from OneDrive, from SharePoint, from Azure. Teams didn't have to build any of that stuff. They just took it out of this software toolkit. But that software toolkit could not have existed without all of this engineering effort to build it into what you can call the substrate. And some of these efforts that have come out, they've been pretty successful. Teams booking, some not so. Actually, StaffPoint is. I've got StaffPoint. StaffHub is an example of a total disaster. I would have thought for the applications. Office 365 groups, I've just realized, should not be there. They've been a success. Some of the things that Office 365 groups did were not so good. But anyway, we'll talk about that. So moving along, because we're at an Exchange conference. So what's the role of Exchange Online? Well, the first thing is to say that unlike the on-premises server, Exchange Online is not the center of an ecosystem. When you've got Exchange Server running online, running in your data center, there's lots of things that come off Exchange Server, like things like your backup regime, things like all the add-on products that you use with it. Exchange is something that you just think about day in, day out. Well, that's not the case inside Office 365, because Exchange Online is really, it's got really two main delivery points. I think it's firstly, it is the provider of email services to Microsoft 365. So if a service wants to send email, you've got Exchange. And second thing, which is the thing that gets overlooked an awful lot, is that Exchange Online is the provider of storage services to the Substrate. So there's a lot of data, as we're going to see, that is kept in mailboxes. There are mailboxes that you don't know about. There are mailboxes you can't see, but they're mailboxes. And they're mailboxes running on Exchange servers, Exchange Online servers, that collectively form the storage service for the Substrate. So these mailboxes, you know all about the mailboxes because you're Exchange admins. You've been running them for years and years and years. You know about user mailboxes and shared mailboxes and group mailboxes used by Microsoft 365 groups, resource mailboxes used for room equipment and so forth and so on. All of those mailboxes can be seen by Exchange admins. Great. You do a get EXO mailbox or get mailbox, whatever you like, you'll be able to see those mailboxes. But then you've got all these other mailboxes which are used by the Substrate and by apps. You've got hidden only, hidden cloud only mailboxes, app mailboxes, which can capture compliance records for Teams, for Yammer, for Planner. You've got cloud only mailboxes that funnel email to Teams channels. So you can email a Teams channel, you get an email address, send email to it, it'll go to a mailbox and gets captured from the mailbox and brought into Teams. You got these scheduling mailboxes used by Microsoft Bookings. And then you got a whole pile of special mailboxes out there, which are used to hold audit records. So when you go and you search the unified audit log, you are doing a mailbox search. You don't know about it because the software doesn't tell you that you're using mailboxes. The fact is you are. And one of the things then that comes out of that is that Exchange Online mailbox sizes are pretty big. There's a 100 gigabyte default quota for enterprise mailboxes, which aids migrations. It helps, you don't have to worry about provisioning any mailboxes as you get stuff over. They're just there. Then you've got a 30 gig recoverable items quota, which grows to 100 gig when on hold or retention policy applies to a mailbox. So a mailbox can be 200 gig very, very easily. And then you've got the 1.5 terabyte archive mailbox, which is a very interesting thing because it's this concept that you can grow small, start off with 100 gig, and then add 50 gig chunks or partitions in the mailbox or segments in the mailbox that chain together to form this logical entity, which is the archive mailbox. That's a pretty interesting concept. So Exchange mailboxes, I guess the takeaway is that there's lots of them, and they're big, but you don't care because all you see are the mailboxes that are in front of you to manage. But the Substrate cares. And I think one of the things we should acknowledge about this is that all of this has been made possible by a great deal of engineering effort that occurred first on premises and then went into the cloud. If we roll back the clock nearly 20 years to the time when Exchange 2003 was launched, those of you that were running servers at that stage might remember that Exchange 2003 was deployed on a SAN. If you're doing a big Exchange deployment, you needed a SAN because Exchange Server was an IO pig. Basically, for every mailbox, you needed one IOPS per second per user, per mailbox. It was just a disaster area. But a lot of engineering effort done after Exchange 2003 was launched enabled the basis for what we have today, which is cost-effective Exchange storage that has enabled large mailboxes. We just talked about them, those 100 gig mailboxes, no problem. And the 1.5 terabyte archive mailboxes, again, no problem. Those mailboxes could not have existed under the previous Exchange storage regime. It also allows Microsoft to deliver this thing called inactive mailboxes, which I think are an absolutely wonderful thing to have if you've got Office 365 E3 or above. An inactive mailbox is a mailbox that belongs to a deleted Azure AD account where a hold existed on the mailbox before the Azure AD account was deleted. And the lovely thing about this is that you can keep these old inactive mailboxes around for as long as you want. And it doesn't cost you anything. They don't incur licensing costs. So you end up, you can basically keep mailboxes for ex-employees or anybody else that you believe you need to keep mailboxes for as long as you want. Now, that's a very simple way of looking at it. And indeed, there's going to be folks that will say, no, I don't want to keep those mailboxes around at all, because for legal reasons or compliance reasons or regulatory reasons or some such reason that I dreamt up on the metro on the way into work today, I can't keep them around. But the point is that for people that need to keep mailboxes around for a long time, for compliance reasons, inactive mailboxes are a wonderful way of doing it. And they were if we didn't have cost-effective Exchange storage, you wouldn't have that. We talked a little bit about the archive mailbox. It was originally called an ever-expanding or bottomless mailbox, archive mailbox. I think whoever wrote that those phrases in Microsoft marketing regretted them shortly afterwards, because it set an idea in user minds and customer minds that you could grow these archive mailboxes to an absolutely colossal size. Indeed, from a technical perspective, you probably could, because as long as you had enough disk space on an individual drive, you could grow these archive mailboxes out and out and out and out and out. But we live in the real world, and there are practical difficulties that have to be dealt with. And part of those practical difficulties are things like, well, if I had a 2 terabyte mailbox, how easy would it be to move this mailbox from one server to another? Can you imagine how long that would take? Just think about all of the consequences of moving a large quantity, very, very, very large quantities of archive mailboxes around. You start thinking, hey, that's maybe not such a great idea. And that's basically why today those archive mailboxes, they are ever expanding, but they do get gated at 1.5 terabytes. That's not so bad. There are very few archive mailboxes out there that have 1.5 terabytes of data. And those that are, they're real monsters. So Microsoft did a great job of actually coming up with a cost-effective scheme for Exchange storage. And it's helped them, because you've got this thing called cloud stickiness. And cloud stickiness means that the more data you put into the cloud, the harder it is you're going to be able to move off that particular cloud platform. And that is a case, I think, in a very practical sense with Exchange. It is also worthwhile saying that this has been a two-way development street. Sometimes the on-premises community, the folks that are still running Exchange server, they'll say they got nothing from the cloud, and the cloud will probably say they really got nothing from Exchange server from on-prem. Well, that's not the case. Microsoft no longer has the same code bases for the two versions of Exchange, but there's no doubt when you look back at it, you look back at the history, you find that plenty of examples when technologies that were proven on premises have helped Exchange Online. Basically, the whole data DAG, the whole thing about log shipping and JBoss storage, that was all proven on premises before it went into the cloud. And it's still the basis. Native data protection is still the basis of Exchange operations today. So that was all proven on premises, made a fantastic contribution to Exchange Online. But then from the cloud experience came back to Exchange servers. You see that in 2019, Exchange 2019, where you see things like the Metacache coming in, hot data that goes into SSD drives so that you get really fast performance back to users. And of course, many of the client level improvements in OA have well, actually, I'm going to retract that. Not say many. I'd say some of the OA functionality improvements that are available today to cloud users are available, have made their way to on premises. So it's all good. It's a two-way street. All of which, to 20 minutes of context, brings us to the Substrate. Now, the Microsoft 365 Substrate is not an app. You can't manage it. You can't see it. It's invisible, but it's there all the time. It is an intelligent Substrate platform for the whole of Microsoft 365, not just Exchange Online, for all of Microsoft 365. So with that in mind, you might agree, yeah, this is pretty important. Now, I stole this picture. Well, it's my version of a picture that Jeffrey Snover, who's used to be a Microsoft fellow, he's just moved to Google. I guess we all get to a point in our career where we need a change. But anyway, Jeffrey did at this session at Ignite 2019. You can go and you can see his session online on YouTube, where he attempted to explain the Microsoft 365 Substrate. And I stole this graphic from him. Basically, what I think he's trying to say is that, you know what? Across Microsoft 365, you have a bunch of very basic objects. The document, yep. Documents exist all over the place. They're in SharePoint, obviously. They're in OneDrive. But they're in email too because they're attachments. And Teams use them as well and whatever. So you've got documents are everywhere. Email is everywhere. Meetings are everywhere. And meetings can show up on different applications, whatever. People, well, the basics of an Azure AD user account, everywhere again. So you got these basic user and other objects. Then you got a set of services that consume these objects. And the services are anything from Azure Active Directory, which obviously will consume people objects. You got Exchange there, will consume things like email and meetings and people and groups and tasks and so forth and so on. You got some other things there I suspect that you wouldn't think about, like the artificial intelligence services that Microsoft runs behind the scenes, search, information protection. These are basic common services that run within the Substrate to take advantage of the objects that are there. And then you've got the graph. And the graph is there to provide this single point of contact, a single API into all of these objects as they're accessed by the services. And that's what apps that you use on a day-to-day basis consume. The apps are built using the graph to ask services for their versions of things like people. Give me a people card in Teams, okay? Put that up. Give me the same people card in Outlook. Well, it's going to go through the same point, and it goes through the same point to get to the people object and populate it and show it. So the Substrate, to me, is basically the definition of the objects and then all of these services that knit things together to deliver it to apps. You can explain it different ways, I guess, but that's the best way I've come up with to explain this particular thing. This is saying what I was trying to actually describe there in practical terms. Just think about it. Common object types, common API. By the way, for any of you that are interested in the Microsoft Graph, I'll be doing a session tomorrow I think is at 11 a.m. Pacific, when I'll be talking about using the Microsoft Graph with PowerShell for Exchange. And we'll see about that. And then you have all these common services which are consumed by the apps, like search and so forth. Now, really important thing. When Jeffrey talked about the Substrate a couple of years ago, he focused on this a lot. He talked about this concept of digital twins. When you think about it, when you got a service like Microsoft Search, it's really difficult for that type of service to go into multiple repositories and process information from those multiple repositories to be able to show you that information gathered from across Microsoft 365. I mean, do I go to SharePoint, Exchange, Teams, Planner, etc., etc., etc. Find all that information from all those repositories and bring them back and put them in at one repository and index that and search from that. Or do I use this concept of digital twins? Which digital twins means that you copy just enough data from app objects, like a SharePoint document, to make indexing and search work. And you bring all that data together into a common repository, which is Exchange Online. And then the services just are able to work against those common those digital twins extracted from all the different applications. They're able to work in one place. And this is great. Excuse me. Different methods are used to get data from apps and bring them into Exchange Online. So, for example, we're going to talk about the compliance records for Teams and Yammer and so forth in a little bit. That's one method. But here's another. I'm sure you've looked at Exchange Online mailboxes. I know I do this all the time. You know, just have a poke through the properties, and you may have noticed that there are email addresses which look kind of strange. You'll be familiar with SMTP email addresses, but here's one for SPO. What does this mean? This is the route that allows SharePoint to take information generated by a user and bring it into Exchange. You don't have to know anything about it. That's what that address is there for. Okay, but the point, all you have to take away from this is that basically digital twins are snapshots of app objects from multiple different applications, which are extracted from those applications, brought together into Exchange Online. They're indexed in Exchange Online. They're there, then available for multiple different services to go and use them. The best example of that is Microsoft Search. You go and search something, you're searching against the substrate. So we talked a little bit about compliance records. Compliance records are generated by the substrate when an app creates new data. The reason why you need a compliance record is that e-discovery needs to be able to find out if somebody did something. So did somebody post a message in a Teams chat? Did somebody delete a document? Did somebody post something in a Yammer community? Did somebody make a change to a Planner task? Something like that. So what happens is that you've got this basic thing of the substrate is monitoring these apps. The apps actually do something, and the app says, hey, you know what? I've got something new for you. And the substrate goes and creates a mail item. Mail item is something like, it's a message. It's a mail message, right? And then it stores the items in a user mailbox, in a group mailbox, or in a cloud-only mailbox, depending what the circumstance is of the item's creation. So, for example, if you're in a Teams personal chat, or you're in a Teams private channel, and you post a message, then a copy of that message is posted into the user mailbox of all of the participants in the group chat or the channel conversation. On the other hand, if you post a message into a channel conversation in a shared channel or a regular channel, if it goes, into a regular channel, a group conversation into a regular channel, I'll say that right again. If you post a message into a regular channel, it'll go into the group mailbox owned by the team that owns that channel. Then if you post into a shared channel, it goes into a cloud-only mailbox. Cloud-only mailboxes are also used to capture information posted by hybrid users, because they don't have a mailbox in Exchange Online, and guest users, because they don't have a mailbox in Exchange Online. So you can't go and post the message or the compliance item into these cloud-only mailboxes. Now, you can't see those cloud-only mailboxes. They're just there. But they're there and they can be searched. They're indexed just like everything else that's in Exchange Online. They're indexed and they can be found by e-discovery. So that's how that works. Now, Here's how to find them. If you want to just go and see where some of those compliance items are, just run get EXO mailbox folder statistics. Go and look in the non-IPM route. Remember that the non-IPM route is where it's the hidden folders, the system folders. It's where it's the set of folders that client applications like Outlook don't display to users. And in this case, what I'm doing is that I'm looking for a folder type which is called Teams Message Data. That's the folder where the Teams compliance items are stored. Okay, and as you can see, there's 16,844 of those items there. So that's basically all the items for all the messages in chats that I have, chats and private channel conversations I have participated in. The items remain there until they're cleaned up by background processing. So the background processing is invoked by retention policies, not Exchange mailbox retention policies, but Microsoft 365 retention policies. And those Microsoft 365 retention policies are Teams specific retention policies. They will go and they will remove items out of the Exchange online mailbox, and then the synchronization process in the background will update Teams to force the removal of the item from the actual Teams message store, which is stored in Azure Cosmos DB. That's the way it works. There's a couple of things though that are really important for administrators to understand about compliance records. First thing is that they are imperfect copies of the actual data. This is not the actual data. No matter, and backup vendors are devils. They will tell you that these items are the actual data. It's not helped by a couple of documentation mistakes that have appeared in Microsoft documentation, which talks about Exchange Online storing chats and messages. Exchange Online never stores data from another application like Teams. These are the digital twins, but they're slightly flawed digital twins in so fact that they're imperfect copies. They don't have all of the data. For example, for Teams messages, they don't store reactions, right? But they're good enough and they're designed. That's why they're good enough. They're designed for compliance, such as retention processing, such as e-discovery and communications compliance. That's what they're used for. They're not used for the actual app itself. The reason why I also say they're imperfect copies is that when the Substrate creates these items in Exchange, they are mail items, they're like messages, but they don't have all of the properties populated. They only have properties populated that are needed for retention processing. Okay, these items are not suitable for backup. Well, you can back them up. Yeah, if you back up an Exchange Online mailbox, you will back up these items. All right, no problem. Well, I question the use of these for backup because you can't restore the data. You cannot take one of these compliance records and stuff it into a Teams chat or a Teams channel. Now, Microsoft is fixing this issue with a Teams export API, and they're shortly going to stop backup vendors copying items out of the copying these compliance records and using them for backups, but it's still out there today, and it's likely to be a changeover period before we get to a better place. Anyway, so that's compliance records. Now, another thing, you may find if you browse the Azure AD audit logs, you may find a reference to this application, Microsoft Substrate Management, and say, well, what the heck is this? In fact, the Substrate Management app is one of these first-party enterprise apps that are registered in Azure AD. There's nothing strange about this. Microsoft has a ton of first-party apps that are registered in the Azure AD for every Microsoft 365 tenant. It's how they get management tasks done. Okay? And the only reason I mention this is that you do see them occasionally showing up. But this one particular showing up in audit logs, in the Azure AD audit logs, where and mostly what I have seen it for is in case of this dual write between EXODS and Azure AD. A couple of years ago, Exchange and Azure AD introduced this dual write mechanism. Exchange and Azure AD have a very close relationship. When you think about it, there's a huge interaction between the two. Why do we have two directories? Well, we have two directories because Exchange ODS, the Exchange Online Directory Service, it stores mail-enabled objects. There are some mail-enabled objects that will never show up in Azure AD. Public folders is a very good example of a mail-enabled object that does not show up in Azure AD. Azure AD has the good sense to not care very much about public folders, but there you have it. Another example would be dynamic distribution lists don't show up in Azure AD. Normal distribution lists do, because they're dealt with as a distribution group by Azure AD, but dynamic distribution lists don't. So Exchange has its own directory, EXODS. It's got copies of all of the mail-enabled objects that it deals with there, like mailboxes and mail contact records and mail user records, public folders, etc., etc. And Azure AD has got all of the information about the actual accounts and groups that it deals with. So there is a good interaction between the pair, but it's important that the two directories are kept in close sync. So you have this dual write mechanism, which says if Exchange makes an update to an object, and that object has to be updated in Azure AD as well, the update only succeeds if both directories are updated successfully. This avoids a problem that used to happen in the early days where you might update EXODS and the write failed to Azure AD or vice versa. So you will see in the audit logs occasionally this app coming up to say, I've updated, I've done this dual write for one reason or another. It's also the service principle that is used by the Microsoft Bookings app, for those of you that have been playing around with it. Okay. So what does the substrate mean to the average Exchange Online administrator? And of course, none of you attending this session are average administrators, because average administrators would come to MEC. But let's talk about this in a theoretical sense. So services work for multiple workloads. Microsoft 365 doesn't build services just for a single workload. Generally speaking, they're always built to work across multiple workloads. The substrate facilitates that. Graph APIs are the preferred ways to interact with those workloads. Exchange Web Services persists. It's still used in relatively new applications like bookings, because the Graph APIs lack some functionality. But I've noticed a huge change in this area over the last number of years. And increasingly, we are going to see that the Graph APIs are the way to interact with all workloads, including Exchange Online. In some cases, you can do great things with Graph APIs and Exchange Online. I was thinking about this the other day. I said, what's the most common PowerShell script that we all used to learn how to write when Exchange 2007 came along and introduced PowerShell to us for the first time? I guess the first script we all learned was how to get a mailbox list. And then very rapidly, we moved on to get a list of mailboxes and their sizes. That was the basic thing. Learn how to use get mailbox and then move on to get mailbox statistics. And basically you were done then, you were proficient in PowerShell. Well, the thing about those type of PowerShell interactions is that they all focus on administrative objects like mailboxes without going inside the mailbox to get the content, which is the reason why you need Exchange Web Services. And that's the reason why those APIs were introduced. They allowed app devs to get inside the mailboxes. Today, you can use the Outlook API to do the same type of thing, because there's a messages API that allows you to go and navigate, and there's a mail folders API that allows you to navigate inside the folders. And indeed, I sat down a little while ago and wrote my own version of the search mailbox commandlet, a mailbox cleanup script that basically navigated down through all the folders inside a user's mailbox and found messages matching a query string and then deleted them. It's grateful. That kind of thing is available with the graph today. You can't do that kind of thing with PowerShell. So as we're moving forward, you will see more and more of this functionality appearing in the Graph API implementation for Exchange Online. There's a little bit of a lag today, but that is a thing to take away. If you're going to go and focus on something to learn, you better off learning for the Graph APIs. And then the final thing I've got on this slide is that mailboxes are larger. Exchange Online mailboxes are generally larger. At one level, you don't care. Microsoft provides all the storage, and you don't care unless mailboxes get to larger than 100 gig, or you need to move them back to Exchange on premises. In that case, you could start seeing some issues, because you might have very large mailboxes to move back, and you might have some of those mailboxes have very large archives. And the thing about Exchange is that Exchange on premises doesn't support the expandable archive. It'll support normal archives. It doesn't support the kind of expandable archives that are available in Exchange Online. So that's the kind of thing that you have to keep an eye out for. Just some other comments about it. Backups take longer because there's more mailbox data. If you take backups, and there's a lot of debate about this, should you take backup on Exchange Exchange Online data? All Exchange Online data is protected by native data protection. You've got the DAGs are set up with 3 copies of the database for the mailbox plus 1 lag database copy. So do you need to have your own backup copy? Some people think they do, some people they don't. But anyway, backups take longer because there's more data. And restores are obviously more complex because of the different ways apps consume mailbox data. So one of the things that you might be interested in is that if you're restoring mailbox data from one of these backup services, one question I asked, will it restore the non-IPM part of the mailbox? Because if it doesn't restore the non-IPM part of the mailbox, then all of your compliance records are going to go. And that may or may not be a problem for you. So after that very rapid run through the Substrate, my conclusion: Exchange Online is the power behind the Substrate. It's where the storage is, it's where all the data is, all these digital twins, and that eventually means that services like Microsoft Search, the artificial intelligence services, all of these things can work because they have that single copy of mailbox data to work with. As we can see from that, well, mailboxes are great places to store data. You can't, as a tenant administrator, you can't manage the Substrate, but you can understand and appreciate its importance. And that's the kind of thing I want you to take away from this session. The Substrate is there. It's a good thing. It's implemented to provide this common platform for Microsoft 365 to work against. It's just doing its job day in, day out. And there's nothing for you to worry about. So with that, I think we have a little bit of time for questions. So I think we can take them, can we? I asked my administrators, Cora, can we take time?
You have about 6 minutes. Yes, please take some questions.
Okay, so I don't know how we're going to do this, folks. So I guess you can come off mic if you want to and ask a question. Or I can look through some of these questions. Nucleus is not part of the Substrate. Nucleus is a SharePoint it's the OneDrive synchronization service for SharePoint lists. So you don't think that. Anybody got a question? Nobody got a question?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go.
Hey, great. Thanks for taking my question. Wondering about the impact to cross-tenant mailbox migrations, if there is a need to migrate mailboxes into another tenant. Typically, you start, I guess, with a mail-enabled user on the target side, but then I guess with the substrate, there's a dependency there for other workloads that want to get stood up maybe in advance of waiting on mailboxes to migrate. Is that an impact to this?
No, I wouldn't worry too much about that, because the thing about it is most tenant-to-tenant migrations, when you're taking mailboxes across, you're not really probably worried about the things like the compliance records, but you might be. But the point would be that once you get the mailboxes across to the target tenant, all those digital twins and whatnot will get populated into that target tenant and become part of its substrate. I don't think you want to take or attempt to take the substrate from the source and bring it in. Just let the substrate repopulate itself in the target.
Right. Yeah. And I guess I'm sorry, I should a little bit more clear. The dependency would be if other workloads were eager to get started up in the target tenant, they need a mailbox in that target tenant for the substrate to work properly. So now there's a dependency on the exchange migration.
Yes and no. I mean, it's hard to be specific because every organization is going to be different. Every tenant-to-tenant migration that I've ever been involved in has been different. Have done a big bang approach, then you don't worry about it because it's just all done. Some take forever. So it's kind of hard to say, but I generally, my perspective is that the substrate will sort itself out. Substrate is kind of internal engineering that you shouldn't have to worry about.
All right, thank you.
Oh, look, somebody posted my Exchange 5.5 book. God, that was a good one. Bring it along to tech next week and I'll sign it. Anybody else? You'll all be very kind to an old man.
I have a quick question about the substrate folder inside of a user mailbox. Right now, we kind of have an issue with the mailbox provisioning, deprovisioning. That everything seems to be kind of combined, right? We have a global Teams hold for Teams chat, which kind of, since the Teams chat data is stored in the user's mailbox, the hold carries over to the Exchange mailbox, which makes it where we can, deprovision. Is there any way to decouple the mailbox from the substrate as far as, because when we go to delete, if someone was mistakenly given a mailbox, but we do want them to use Teams, we have no way of removing the mailbox without wiping out everything. Is there a way to kind of decouple that?
The way I've seen in some cases is that people put in place retention policies that remove Teams compliance information very quickly and use that for the mailboxes that they're considering moving or needing to work with. But there is a problem. There's a known problem. Because I actually investigated this a little while ago and wrote about it in Practical 365 in terms of how difficult it can be to delete a mailbox, and I think that's what you're getting at here. Because if you got a mailbox and you want to delete it, you have got to make sure that every one of the holds come off that mailbox, and it's easy enough to get rid of the normal retention holds, be they Exchange mailbox retention policy holds, litigation holds, or holds that are put on by Microsoft 365 retention policies. There are procedures to get rid of all of those. They're fine. What gets you is two things. One, where documents in the or items in the mailbox have specific retention labels assigned to them, because you have to then find those mailbox items and remove the labels. They count as holds in their own way. The second thing is with these things called app retention policies. And an app retention policy is one like a Teams retention policy. And the reason why I say there's a problem here is that the classic way of preparing a mailbox to move on would be to either remove a retention hold or to put in an exclusion for that mailbox in the retention policy. And as it turns out, you can't put an exclusion into an app retention policy. So you can't say, I'm moving Tony Redmond's mailbox, so put in an app exclusion in that policy for Tony Redmond so that Teams doesn't worry about it and retention processing doesn't worry about it anymore. So what seems to be the case is that you have to remove or stop the retention policy processing for a while, then go ahead and do your stuff. So you disable the retention policy, if you will, then go ahead and do your stuff, and then re-enable the retention policy again afterwards. It's frankly an unsatisfactory case or situation to be in. And I know that the Microsoft retention policy guys are working on it to fix the gap at the moment. So I don't have a very good answer for you because I was frustrated as hell as I was writing about it in this article. But if you'd like to go and check out the article, you'll see all the issues I met as I was trying to delete mailboxes.
Yeah, we've run into quite a few of them. Appreciate the answer there, especially because we're in a hybrid environment as well.
Yeah,
so
even harder.
Yeah, because it also causes a problem when, if you deprovision on-prem, then you get an Azure AD sync error saying that it can't delete the mailbox because it's on hold. And even if you reintroduce a license, that error never goes away. And the only way to clear it, based on what Microsoft has told us, is you have to completely wipe out the Azure identity, which is ridiculous in my opinion. Or I found a workaround of moving the mailbox on-prem, waiting for the error to clear, and then moving it back to the cloud. So yeah, definitely looking for, some improvement in that area. So just wanted to see if you had any other information that I didn't have.
I don't claim to be the universal oracle. I nearly said the universal oracle for everything to do with mailbox moves. I absolutely do not. So I'm afraid I disappoint you there.
Well, appreciate the answer. Thanks.
Okay, no worries. Frank is suggesting that you need to permanently delete previous mailbox info or some such switch to set user. Oh, yeah, that'd be nice.
Well, we used to have the ignore legal hold, but they took that away from us. Now we have nothing.
I think that the difficulty is that once you get into the area of compliance, everybody is so sensitive about introducing anything that allows you to remove information. Because then you get into problem with compliance officers and whatnot. So it tends to be that they want to retain the information above all, and that's how you run into these roadblocks. That's been my kind of experience anyway.
Thanks a lot.
No worries. No worries. Anybody else? Are we saying go? You're all tired. You want to go to the next session? Okay, I think we can call it a halt. Thanks for coming along, and enjoy the rest of MEC. It's a great event. There's lots of stuff going on, so go to those other sessions.